Okay, over the weekend, a hacker took over the webpage of NYU, New York University. Obviously, we don't approve of breaking the law, but what's interesting is what they did while taking over the website. What they did was publish a chart of test scores of people who got into NYU. What that chart showed was that despite an order from the U.S. Supreme Court 2 years ago, NYU engaged in extreme racial discrimination against whites and Asians. The war on white people continues. We have a very special guest. His name is Kirk. He is a statistician, and he posts actively on X and also is a very successful Substack blog. He says he's been given access to this data and that this hacker is publicizing. He also prefers to maintain his anonymity, so he's going to join us using an AI-generated voice, which I completely support. By the way, we can make fun of it. Anonymous speech is uniquely American, and we should protect it at all costs. Kirk joins us now. Kirk, thank you for joining the program. What did you learn in this data dump from NYU?
Hi there, Charlie. So, first of all, this is an amazing data dump. This is the data for 3 million students going back to the late 1980s, and there's just a huge amount of information here. There's test scores, there's grades, there's extracurriculars, there's all sorts of information about where these kids are from and what their backgrounds are, and just all sorts of stuff that tells us how well qualified they'll be to do well when they're at NYU. And what we found is that NYU is really, really pushing down on Asian and white students, and they are boosting they're bringing in a lot more Hispanic and Black students than would be justified from their GPAs, from their test scores, from anything we can see. Like, for example, Asian students, they tend to do a lot of extracurriculars. They do more than white students, they do more than Hispanic students, they do more than Black students. Somehow, despite more extracurriculars, more impressive extracurriculars, more Olympiad wins, more basically everything that signals a good student, they get admitted way, way less than they should. And if they were admitting meritocratically to NYU, the number of Asians would double. The number of whites would go up by about a quarter. It would go from about 23% to about 30%. The number of Hispanics would go from about 10% to roughly 1%. And the number of Black students would go from about 4% to about 0.5%. So they're putting a really, really heavy hand on the scale here.
And it's against federal law and federal guidelines that President Trump issued. Walk us deeper into the numbers. What is the average SAT score that a Black student gets to go into NYU? And what does the equivalent average Asian or white student need to get into NYU?
Yeah, so the average Black student who goes to NYU has an SAT score of 1289.87, so about 1290. The average Asian student who goes in has a score of about 1486. So there's a roughly 200-point gap between Black and Asian students. It's interesting, though, if you look at the rejected students, rejected Asians have an average SAT score about 1382, which is still about 100 points higher than the average admitted Black student. So even when they're rejecting lots of qualified Asian students, they're rejecting lots of qualified white students. Their average rejected score is 1361, which is also higher than the accepted Black average. It's higher than the accepted Hispanic average. They don't seem to be caring much about the qualifications of the students. They care a lot more about race. And to be fair, they said they were going to do this. Back when the Supreme Court made their decision, NYU immediately called it a step backwards. And then they said that they would be remaining committed to promoting diversity on campus, which was basically an admission. They were going to do exactly this. So they said it and they did it.
So a lot of schools are doing this. Are they just gambling that the courts won't crack down on them, that they're just going to be blatantly breaking the law? Is that basically their current calculation?
Yeah, and there's some precedent for this. So a lot of schools have actually been breaking the law for a long time, even after they've been explicitly told to stop doing this on their own. So, for example, the University of Michigan was told back in the day that they should not be doing affirmative action. They were explicitly banned from it directly in a Gore case. And what did they do? They still engaged in affirmative action. They tried to claim that they were doing it through, for example, stepping up their recruitment efforts by recruiting people specifically in inner cities and whatnot. But the reality is that there was still no way to explain the results they got from what they did. So schools actively defy court orders. They believe that nobody's going to punish them. They think they're above the law. And it definitely seems like they are. There are not enough court cases being brought forward. And unfortunately, the administration hasn't compelled universities to release the data required to show that they're breaking the law. We're lucky that this hacker has jumped in and provided us with all the data we need to show, yes, they are definitely breaking the law. They are doing what they're not supposed to be doing. This is a rare insight.
It is a very rare insight. Can you explain to the uninitiated in our audience the standard deviation difference between getting a 1485 on the SAT and a 1289? Some people might say, well, that's only 200-point difference. But talk about how big of a standard deviation that is in test scoring, especially with moving averages and admission. Is that remarkable, that kind of a difference? There's a lot of talk about what's happening in Israel right now. Hostages being released, terrorists resurfacing, Gaza plans, and so on. But there's one thing we tend to overlook: the people of Israel. The war has taken a huge physical and emotional toll on the Jewish people. And that's why I want you to know about the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. And I want you to support the important work they do. IFCJ is on the ground throughout Israel, providing food and life-saving aid to the sick and elderly, even released hostages and their families. Join with me and visit ifcj.org/learn more.
That is very remarkable. This is a very, very large difference. So this is the difference between, for example, being put in a remedial mathematics course in high school and being in an AP class. This is the difference between a doctor, like a medical doctor, your average medical doctor, and your average man on the street. This is the difference between, my gosh, it's a massive, massive difference. It's a whole standard deviation. And when you have selection, meaning the university selects people who are talented enough to go there, with their hand on the scale, when you have it, it reduces the variance more. So this difference becomes more magnified. This is actually closer to 1.5 standard deviation. So it's like comparing really like a neurosurgeon to a man on the street. It's a very, very large difference. Everybody can kind of understand that that's pretty huge. And I think that's just how it is. It's remarkable how large it is.
I can grasp that. Talk about what this actually then means for the campus culture. Not that this is the most, what I think is the best argument, but what does this then mean for a classroom where you have someone that should not be in the class? Does this bring down the quality of instruction because teachers then have to instruct to the lowest common denominator?
Absolutely. So what this does is it makes it so, for example, you need to have remedial mathematics courses. You need to have courses that are simpler. You can't have rigorous organic chemistry classes. You can't have all of the difficult weeder classes because, well, they're just too hard for a lot of the students who are coming in. These students, they fail more often. They are more likely to just not do anything interesting during their time. They're less likely to have research experience, and yet they're favored all the way. They're favored in terms of getting admitted, and they're favored in terms of getting picked up later. And they so there's a pipeline from undergraduate admissions through to graduate admissions, through to medical school and all that. And by letting underqualified students in at these early stages, you also let them in at later stages, and that reverberates. So throughout society, we're going to see a lot of professionals who are underqualified everywhere. Because elite schools like New York University, like Northwestern, like Harvard, like Yale, they let in people who just shouldn't have made the cut or should have gone elsewhere. And so they go launder the status of those universities, the degrees they get from there, up towards brighter horizons for them, but a bleaker future for the rest of us. We're going to have to end up with doctors who are less qualified to do their jobs. We're going to end up with researchers who are, it's somewhat zero sum or research money out there, that they're going to divert funds from smarter people, better people who could have done a better job, towards people who are less qualified and less capable of actually making a difference with that money. The social implications of this are huge. The implications on campus are huge. You're going to see more protesters, for example. A lot of them are like underqualified people who have a lot, don't really value their time very much. The sorts of people who are more likely to be lazy in high school, and so they didn't get as good of grades as those Asian kids who, put in the work and should be there about, twice the rate they are. There's really enormous implications here.
So let me ask you in closing here. You're a data guy. Do we have the data of what all these results, with all these results in? Do less qualified doctors make more mistakes? What does this then mean for society at large?
They do, yes. They are more likely to get complaints against them by patients. They are more likely to be sued. They are more likely to, have malpractice suits brought up. They're more likely to injure people. They're more likely to fail at surgeries. They are more likely to have a wide array of bad outcomes. And this is obviously bad. There is some need to have doctors who, aren't super smart. They can just prescribe antibiotics. But when it comes down to the specialties, when it comes down to the end of life stuff, like, oh, you need a critical surgery for your cancer, you need a critical surgery for fixing something in your brain, and then you really want the best qualified people. And unfortunately, those prestigious programs, they love to pick people who are, I hate the term sounds insulting, but it's the reality. They are affirmative action candidates because they want to launder prestige towards these people. They want to take people who are not qualified, who are historically underrepresented, and they want to make them look considerably better. And that leads to massive misallocation that is arguably worse in the most important fields because those are the highest prestige fields. And because the highest prestige fields are getting messed up the most, the impacts are larger than you might expect from just a glance. It can be pretty bad.
Cremu, excellent analysis. Thank you for taking the time. I want to put that chart up one more time here before we say goodbye. This is what's happening to our elite institutions. Look at that. That at NYU, this is New York University, blatantly violating federal law. Average test score for a black student that comes in, average test score for an Asian student. That is active discrimination against white and Asians. You want to see DEI in practice, affirmative action in practice, it's right there. Thank you so much, Cremu. Talk to you soon. Thank you. By the way, the 14th Amendment allegedly says all this is illegal. Why should the federal government fund discrimination based on race?